So what I've got here is an iPad app, and it's pulling from the StackOverflow API. And in this episode, we are going to do sentiment analysis on the comments on StackOverflow. Sometimes those comments can be pretty nasty, and sometimes they can be very, very nice. And luckily, HP has put out this really cool idle on demand API, which doesn't just like give you information, it actually does textual analysis. So it's pretty freaking awesome. So first thing I did was I pulled from that API just basically a bunch of random comments. You can see the username below and their actual score. When you click on this one, it's going to then do sentiment analysis and give you the overall for that comment. And then it's going to highlight the parts that it felt were positive and put in red the parts that it felt were negative. On the bottom, it shows you the username and their score, and on the top, the overall sentiment. Sometimes the sentiment can be just positive. Sometimes it can have a mixture of positive and negative. So you can see that in this one, this behavior is well defined in Java is a positive comment. Now something like this is neutral because it's just basically code. Try this. So then you have, this one's completely negative. It is never right to set a date one component at a time. So here's one that's negative. This construct seems to be more confusing than elegant to me. So this is pulling from the StackOverflow API, and it's going to then do a second request to HP's idle on demand, which has a lot of different things in it. It has actual databases that you can build on your own to then do the textual analysis on. It has facial recognition and all this really cool stuff. I just decided to start with the simplest one, which is the sentiment analysis, which is going to read the sentence and then analyze it for its sentiment. You can see it's actually pretty quick. So I'm going to show you how to make this. So for the sentiment analysis part, what you're going to want to do is sign up for an HP Idle on Demand account by going to idleondemand.com. I've signed up and I have this account here, and everything with it is completely free, so you might as well take advantage of it. We have down here a bunch of different APIs that they have, and they just added a bunch of new ones. The one I'm using is the sentiment analysis, and when you click on it, when you go to their APIs part, they have a part that says try, and you can click on negative sentiment and it'll return the JSON data down here. So you can see we'll get a positive array and a negative array, and then at the bottom we'll get an aggregate score. What we're interested in is taking the combination of the positive and the negative and then grabbing the aggregate score and then mushing that all into one paragraph. So it's pretty simple in that way. What you'll then want to do is go over to the StackOverflow site. If you go to api.stackexchange.com/docs, at the bottom you can see a bunch of API calls you can make. For mine, what I did was comments, and then I wound up playing around with different stuff. And you can basically just play around with this. But the most important thing is you'll notice that when you just run this, it doesn't return the comment body back. You have to go under the filter, and under comment, you have to make sure that you include the body. Now, all we really need is just the body and some user information. So you want to make sure that you include owner as a shallow user. And so you have the shallow user, and then you can open up the shallow user part, and you want to make sure that they have at least the display name and their reputation, which will be their score. And once you do this, you save it, it'll give you random letters. And when you run this, then we can finally get the actual body of the comment itself and the user that made the comment. That will have HTML in it, and what we'll have to do is kind of remove the HTML using a regular expression. So you're going to get a lot out of this because we're also going to be highlighting that text in green and red, and I'll show you how to use attribute selectors to do that. And you're going to also need to HTML decode the text and then URL encode the text so that you can send it over to HP Idle on Demand. So you're going to have to do all these things, and I'll show you how to do that. I had to struggle with it, so now you don't have to. That's the idea. So you're going to create a new project, and that project, we'll make it a single view application. Even though it's kind of a master detail, we'll just make it a single view application. And we'll call this sentiment. And you want to make sure it's Swift, we're not using core data, and universal is good. And then you're going to have the projects, click create, portrait, landscape, all that stuff is good. So the first thing we'll do is we'll create our storyboard. You'll notice that when we get on here, it doesn't have anything, it just has this one initial view. We're going to delete that view and the view controller itself. So you click that view controller and click delete. Make sure you keep saving. Then you're going to drag on a navigation controller. It's this big thing here. And that's going to come with a table view controller, which is good, that's what we want. Now, nothing is the initial view now, so we need to just set this as the initial view. So you'll click the attributes, and you'll click is initial view controller. That'll add this arrow here, which shows you that you now have a starting point for your application. So now we have this table view. Now the only problem is that our view controller that it came with is not a table view controller. So you want to set this as a UI table view controller. And then you go back to your main storyboard, you'll set this table view up here as the class is this view controller. So now it'll control a table, the table view controller. So you can save that. The second thing we want to do is we want to add our section where we're going to, now we're not going to do too much on constraints here. So we're going to add a view controller here. Just add that right there. The key here is to drag from the cell to the view controller. And if you do the show, it will add the bar at the top. So we can give this a try. Up here, just for fun, we'll click static cells, 3 cells here. So now we should be able to run this, and we can run this on the new iPhone 6 Plus. You can see that when you click on one of those rows, it actually does the segue for you. So we're good there with that. So now we'll return this table view. Click on the table view itself, change static cells back to dynamic prototypes, and we don't really need anything else here. We can set up our detail later. So you can go back to your view controller, which is now a table view controller, and you want to create a URL, which is sort of a global variable here in this class for the Stack Overflow comments, because that's the first thing we'll load. You can use mine if you want. I'll put that in the description. And this will get recent comments, I believe, within the last week. Now this is just a timestamp here, so you could alter these on the fly to get last week's comments. They're sorted by votes, so you could see if maybe the more negative ones are on top or whatever. And then the filter is going to make sure, my filter is going to make sure that the body of the comment is in there. So now that you've got that, we can create our table and fill it with some information. So normally when you start a table project, it gives you all the extra functions. So we'll have to create those ourselves. But the first thing we'll do in our view did load is we'll call a function called getData. And this will allow us to go and grab that Stack Overflow data. In getData, we're going to use a little library that I created. I can't necessarily say that you should use this in production, but it's just a very, very simple library for grabbing JSON data. We can copy this and create a new file, a new Swift file, and we'll call it get.swift. And in here, I'll just paste the contents of that. And now we have a way to go and grab the JSON data and return it back as an NS dictionary. Now, one of the problems you may run into when you're grabbing JSON data is that it may return an array instead of a dictionary, and you have to take into account that situation. This library that I created, if you can call it that, it's 25 lines long, does not take that into account. I may update it later to take more things into account, but for right now, it's more of just a let's be able to do this quick. There's also a library called AlamoFire, which you can use, but I just wanted to make this bare bones, super simple. So in our get data, we can just create an error just in case one does happen. So we'll create an NS error. And then for this, we'll call our get. And in this, we'll pass the stack comments URL. And then we'll just have the return, where it's going to pass in this response into this response object. So that's going to return a bunch of comments. So we can print line the response here. So let's run this on our new fancy iPhone 6 Plus. See if we get any errors. Okay, so we got the JSON data back. So we're good to go here. So now we can kind of loop through that JSON data. Okay, so now we're going to loop through all that data that we got, and we're going to populate the table. So, and I figured out one thing that stops giving errors is if you just set up here, for me, if I set this to my iPad versus setting this to one of the simulators right now, that gives me less errors. Why? I don't know. So we're going to loop through the data now. In that response is going to be a bunch of comments. So we can just say for comment in response items, and we're going to force that out because we know that there is an items in that dictionary, and we want to make this an array, an NS array, so that we can now loop through it and do this in a for loop. In this for loop, we're going to grab the comment body, which is equal to this individual comment body as a NS string. We're going to need to clean up that string as well. So we have the contents of that. Now we need to remove some HTML from that comment. So we're going to make a variable called removed HTML. Actually, we'll just call this remove HTML. And we're going to say we need a regular expression up here that will help us remove the HTML. So the regular expression I'm going to use is a typical tag finding HTML one. So we're going to say regex is equal to an NS regular expression dot regular expression with pattern, and the pattern looks like this. So that will find us any tags that are in the comment body, and we're going to just remove them. So the options will be nil and the error will be nil as well. So now down here, what we can do is we can say that we want to remove all the comments. So we'll say self.regular expression string by replacing matches in string, and the string we want to replace it in is the comment body. The options is going to be nil. The range, meaning how much of this do we want to do this with, we're going to say we're going to use an NS make range, and we want to go from 0 to the length of the string. So comment body dot length. And the template we're going to use is a blank string. So that will remove the HTML. Now we can get the owner of that comment, meaning the user, and we'll just get the dictionary that is that user, and then we'll parse the individual stuff out of there. So we'll say comment owner, which is going to be an NS dictionary, and then we can say that the reputation is equal to an owner reputation, and we'll force that out as an integer because the reputation is their score. So that's going to be an integer. And then the comment ID, we don't even really need that, but we'll grab it anyway. So the comment ID is going to be equal to a comment, and we're going to grab the comment ID from the comment, and that's going to be as an integer as well because that's an ID. And then we're going to get the owner name, which is going to be equal to the owner dictionary that we grabbed from the comment, and within that we're going to grab the display name. That's the way it shows up in the StackOverflow API. Force that out as a string. So now we have the owner name. We just need to now create a sort of comment object that we can use to populate an array of comments. So let's create a new file that we're going to make as comment.swift, and this will be an individual comment object. So for this we're going to use a class because even though we're passing the data around, sometimes we do need to reassign things, like the comment body will need to reassign that. So we do need to have individual instances of these comments. this individual comment is going to have the body, the comment ID, the owner reputation, and the owner name. We can create all those variables, and rather than underscore rep, I'll do this as that, like there we go. That's more syntactically correct. Now, because this is a class, we need to create a constructor because we want to be able to instantiate this object with all of these things built in instead of having to individually assign each one. So in our constructor, we'll take the body, which is a string, the comment ID, and we can make this comment ID. We'll take the owner rep and the owner name, and all of that will be populated. So we're going to do self.body is equal to body, self.comment ID is equal to comment ID, self.ownerrep is equal to ownerrep, self.name is equal to name. So now we basically just have a little object here that we can pass around that is an individual comment. You can go back to your view controller, and in your view controller now we can populate an individual comment. So we could create a variable called comment object, or we could call it comment value object or whatever. And we'll just create a new comment. So the body of the comment is going to be the removed HTML. So because we needed to strip the HTML out of that body. The comment ID is going to be the comment ID. This should be comment ID. So the comment ID is going to be the comment ID. The owner rep is going to be the, or it's just going to be rep. We just called it rep. Owner name is going to be owner name. So now we have a comment object. So now we're going to populate an array of comments. So up at the top, we're going to make an array of comments, and that's going to be equal to an array of comments. Down here, we can just say comments dot append, and we'll append a new comment object. So now we should have a full array of, because we're in a closure, we do need to do self. So we'll do self.append comment object. Now what we need to do is we need to reload the table. And because that's a UI change, we need to make sure that that happens on the main thread. Because we're within the body of a closure, that may not happen on the main thread. So we need to say dispatch async, and the queue, the thread we want to use is the dispatch main dispatch get main queue. The block we're going to use as a trailing closure, and down here we can now say self.tableview.reload data. But before we reload the data, what we want to do is we want to fix those comments up. They're going to have some apostrophes are going to be ampersand pound 59 semicolon or something like that. So we need to fix those up. And rather than doing those outside of the thread, we'll do them in the main thread. So we'll do self.fix comments, and we have to create a function called fix comments. And in the fix comments, we're going to loop through all of our comments. We're going to say for comment in comments, and this is our comments array that we populated with each individual comment object. Now we're going to fix that comment body to remove all the stuff out of it. There's no easy way to do this, so we're just going to do grab the NS data from the comment.body.data using encoding, and we're going to use NSUTF-8 string encoding, and we don't need the other part here, and we're going to say that we are going to get the attributed options, which is going to be equal to an array or a dictionary. NS document type document attribute is going to be the key, and the value is going to be NS HTML text document type. So from that, we can get an attributed string, which is going to be equal to ns attributed string. We don't need this to be a mutable one. We're going to use the data from the ns data that we got, which is the encoded data. The options is going to be the attributed options. The document attributes is going to be nil, and the error is going to be nil. So now we have an attributed string. We're going to grab the actual string out of the attributed string, because an attributed string is a completely different thing, and we'll also use that to color code our text. So we'll say decoded string is going to be equal to the attributed string, and we'll grab the string out of the attributed string. So now we can say that the comment.body, the body of the comment, is equal to a decoded string. Now there may be better ways or places to run the fixed comments, but this is how you can fix the encoding of the data to make it normal. We could print out, if you wanted to test this, you could say print line here on the comment body. But we'll just trust that that works. And this will reload the table. So now we just need to populate our table correctly. So we need to do the normal table stuff. So one of those things is we need to say number of sections in table view, and we're going to just return 1 for that. So that's like the alphabetical ABC sections that you see when you drag your finger down the iPhone on your contact list. We only have 1 section because we're not doing any sort of sections with that. We're going to do the cell for row at index path. So that's table view cell for row at index path. And this wants the actual cell that we're going to get from that index path. So it's going to loop through every cell that it should have, and it's going to grab the right one. So we're going to get the cell identifier, and we're going to call the cell a comment cell. Now, in order for us to call this a comment cell, we need to go back to our main storyboard, click on this cell. You got to click on the table view first and then click on the cell. You should get this identifier. So we'll call this comment cell. And that thing that we referenced in the view controller, if you go back to your view controller, comment cell, we're saying use that identifier. So now we have to actually create a cell to use, and that's going to be a UI table view cell, which is going to be equal to the table view, which is the table that this controller is controlling, DQ reusable cell with identifier. And we need the one that we can pass the index path in as well. So we're going to pass in that cell identifier, and the index path is going to be the index path that is passed in to this function. So we're going to say index path. And we're going to downcast the whole thing as a UI table view cell. So now we're good to go. So now we can say, we can actually set the text of the cell. So we can say cell.text label, and we have to force that, and that's going to be equal to, the text is going to be equal to our comments, and we want to get a comment in our array of comments, so that's index path dot row, and in that, now we have a comment, so we can say dot body, which will have the decoded string out of it. So now we are setting the text of that to be the decoded string. Now we can say cell dot detail text label dot text is going to be equal to, we're going to get a comment at this current row. So now we have the comment. So now we can just say owner name. And what we'll do is we'll turn this whole thing into a string, and we will concatenate also the a string version of the owner's reputation, because that's an integer, so we want to make sure that that's a string. So we'll say comment index path.row. Now to make this a little better, we could have set a variable that was the current comment, but we just happened to kind of hard code it each time. So, and now all we need to do is we just have to return the cell itself, because this needs a return of a UI table view cell. So the last thing we have to do is we just have to tell it how many comments are going to be in the table, how many rows. So we can say table view number of rows in section. Now remember, we only have one section, and so we're really just returning the number of rows, which is going to be the number of comments. So our array of comments dot count is what we're going to return. So that will return the length of that. Now, in order for us to use this detail text label, we need to set up for our table view cell that it's going to be the subtitled one. So it's going to be title and subtitle. So now this should actually work. So it says failed to instantiate the default view controller. So we need to set this navigation controller to be the first controller. We will go to the attributes of that, and here we'll say is initial view controller. So the other thing we have to do is on our actual table view, we actually have to assign it to the class, otherwise it's never going to know. So over here in custom class, you just have to assign that to the view controller. Okay, you can see that we did in fact get our table filled with all of the comments. So now the only thing left to do is to do the sentiment analysis on it. You can see that we have the user, and you can see that we also have their score here as well. So now let's actually grab the sentiment analysis. First thing we'll do is we'll actually load in some text into the next view controller. So in this view controller, when they click on it, we want to grab, let's say, a label. Now, we're not going to go into constraints too much here. Mainly our point is to show you how to load this stuff. And then we're going to get a text view for the actual comment. And then we'll get one more label, which will just say which is positive or negative. This label, if you go to the attributes, we can make it just bigger. Let's make it centered. There we go. And this text, we can just expand the width a little bit. And this label will expand the width a little bit as well, all the way out to the outer edges. And we'll make that centered as well. So now all we have to do is attach this to some sort of view. So we'll go in sentiment and we will make a new Swift file called detailview.swift. In our detail view, we're going to show you how to highlight this text. But first we just need to make a class called detailView, which is going to be a UI view controller. And the reason that's not coming up is because we need to import UIKit. So now we should get the UI view controller. What we need here is we need our sentiment URL. And if you go to idle OnDemand and you go to that API, you'll see the URL for this is available there. So I have the URL right here. Everything is at api.idleondemand.com. And then I believe it's the version number of the API and then API. And they always have sync or async. And you're probably going to want sync. If you do async, then you'll have to go and fetch the results later. But if you do sync, it'll actually return them. We have analyze sentiment v1. You're going to pass in your API key. Your API key is going to be different than mine. I'm going to change my API key after this so you can't use mine. You'll do the ampersand and then the text that you want to pass in, followed by that text. And we'll paste the text on at the end. We want to get this comment that the user clicked on. So we'll just create a comment. We're going to get a sentiment response, which is going to be when we go and call the sentiment analyzer, it's going to return back some JSON data. We'll put that in a dictionary. So we'll call this sentiment response, and that'll be an NS dictionary. We need to store our user label, our comment body, and the sentiment, those actual labels themselves. So we're going to need to attach this view controller to the detail view. So now it has that. So now by doing that, we should be able to click the Tuxedo Man and it should show right. It shows the right one. So now you can hold Control and drag over this. And the top one, this is going to be the actual sentiment. So we'll call this sentiment, which is going to be a UI label. We need to grab this text, which is going to be, let's call this the comment body. And we're going to grab this bottom one, which is going to be the user info. So we'll call this the user label. So now we have a reference to those three labels. So now we can actually do our analyzing of the text. So we don't really need to look at that anymore. So we can go back to our detail view. So in our detail view, we should have a view did load. And in our view did load, we have the comment body dot text is going to be equal to the comment body, which is the individual comment that we will populate from the other view. So we're going to populate it with the comment dot body. So in the other view, before the segue, we'll populate this view's comment. And I'll show you how to do that in a second. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to take the label for the user, which is that user label. We'll set the dot text equal to, and we'll do that same thing we did before, where we set the comment dot owner name followed by a colon followed by the comment dot owner rep. And then all we need to do is just call get sentiment. So now we have a function called get sentiment. And here's where we're going to do all of our getting of the sentiment. So luckily we have this sort of compact little get.swip, so we'll use that. We'll set up an error just in case. Now before we do that, we should populate this comment object with the right comment. So we'll go back to our view controller. The way that you can populate the next view, prepare for segue. So prepare for segue. And you're going to, that's an override. That's why that code completes like that. So you can get that next view. We'll call it detail view, which is going to be, detail view is going to be a detail view, which can be equal to the segue's destination controller, the destination view controller. And because that could be any old view controller, we want to make sure that that is marked as a detail view. So now that we have that, we can say detail view, we want the correct one, which should now have a comment property, and we can say that that's going to be equal to the currently selected row. So comments, and we want to get the table view, and the way you get the currently selected rows, table view dot index path for selected row, and that will give us the index path, and from that we want to grab the row. Now we have the row and we've populated our comment correctly. So now we can go back to our detail view and we can actually grab our sentiment analysis data. So if we were to do this right now, you would see that the view is properly populating with the data, but we're not actually doing anything with that data. We're not analyzing it yet. So I'll just show you that real quick. So here's our data. What we can do is we can click on one of these rows and you can see that the data does populate. Now we didn't use any constraints. We could just put a couple constraints on this to make sure that it looks at least centered. So we'll do that. But whatever we populate this with, whatever we click on, it's going to populate that text area. We can actually grab the sentiment analysis now. So to grab the sentiment analysis, we're going to get the encoded text. So The text is currently not good to send over a URL GET request, so we need to make it good. So what we can do is say string by adding % encoding with allowed characters. And the allowed characters we want to use an ns character set .url query allowed character set. So what this is going to do is it's going to take all of our characters, turn all the spaces into %20, etc., etc. Because if you just send it over plain Jane, then it's not going to work. So now it's encoded properly to be sent over by URL. So now we can call our get.json. The URL that we want is going to be the sentiment URL. And to that, we're going to add the encoded text. I'm going to force that out. So in here, we will type the response in, and then what we'll do is we'll get the self.sentiment response. And we'll say that that is going to be equal to the response so that we can, keep a reference to that response that we got back from the database. Now what we need to do is, because we're going to update the text on the UI, we need to do this on the main thread. So we have to say dispatch async, not async f, just async, async. So we'll do dispatch get main queue. And what we'll do is, now what we need to do is we need to get the aggregate from that URL, meaning what was the overall score of the comment sentiment. If it's in the negatives, then we can say that it's a negative thing. If it's in the positive, we can say it's a positive thing. But luckily, they provide us with the sentiment itself. They'll say negative, positive, neutral. So we don't even have to deal with the score. Now you could write the score out. Of course, you'd have to format it, but we're not going to do that. We'll just say var aggregate is equal to self.sentiment response. And from that, we just need to grab the JSON aggregate. And then we're going to grab the sentiment. And we're going to mark that as a string. So now we can say self.sentiment.text, and that's that label that we actually have on there. This is going to say neutral, whatever, is going to be equal to the aggregate. So that aggregate is coming straight from the JSON data, and it says neutral, positive, negative, whatever. So now we're doing that. So now we're going to go about our business of actually highlighting the text. So we're going to say highlight text, and this is where it gets really fun. Function highlight text. This is where we're going to take the text and turn it green if it's positive and red if it's negative. The way you do this is you use what's called an attributed string. So the first thing that we're going to do is we can just create a variable here for everything that is positive. So we'll call this the positives, and we'll get that from the sentiment response. And again, if we just set this to the iOS device, then it'll stop giving us errors. So we set the sentiment response, and out of that array, we're going to grab everything that is positive. So this will be an array of positive stuff. We're going to use the exclamation point to force that out because we know for sure that that exists in there. And we're going to type this as an NS array. By typing it as an NS array, we're going to be able to loop through it in a for loop. Then we can create our full attributed string. And the attributed string is going to allow us to color code this string and do something with it, like turn parts green and turn other parts red. The way we're going to do this is we're just going to create an NS mutable attributed string. So the string that we're going to use here is going to be based off of the body of the comment. So we have our comment body, and we've made an NS mutable attributed string. So now we can actually add different attributes to that string. So what we can do is we can loop through all of the positive sentiments within our positives. So we can say for each positive sentiment in positives. What we'll do is we'll create a string, which is going to be the comment body as an NS string so that we can perform some NS string stuff on it. So we'll say comment.body as NS string. Now we have this string, which is an NS string, and we can get the actual positive value out of that positive sentiment, because that positive sentiment is going to be what's called an any object, be an NS dictionary, so we can grab different stuff out of it. So we can say positive sentiment as NS dictionary. So now we have our positive sentiment as an NS dictionary. So now we have the positive sentiment, and we're going to get the selected range. So what we need to do in order to get the range of the string, which is the part that should be green or the part that should be red. Right now we're dealing with the positive stuff, so we're only going to deal with the green stuff. So we can say the string, which is the comment body, dot range of string. For that, we're going to pass into that the positive sentiment that HP's idle on demand found. So we can say positive, and in that JSON data there's a thing called original text. So if you just look in there, you'll see it's original text. We can use the exclamation point to force that out because we know for sure that that value is there. Because what happens is when you access members of an NS dictionary, they may or may not be there. When you use that exclamation point, you're saying, I am sure it's there, so force it out. And if it's not there, and you force it out like that, it's going to crash the program. So you better be sure that what you're forcing out is absolutely there. And we do know that because we're grabbing it from HP's APIs. And then we're going to cast that as a string. So now we have a selected range, and that is a range of where this green text is in the bigger string. So now we can add an attribute to our full string. That is to say, we want this to be green. So the attribute name has to be a string, and we want this to be, we want to use the attribute NS foreground color attribute name. And that's going to allow us to pass in a color and a range, and it will highlight the string within that range, that color. And the value is the color, so we can say UI color dot green color, and the range is going to be the selected range. So now what that's going to do is it's going to allow us to select just the parts that were the positive sentiments and turn them green. So what we can do is we can copy this entire thing here, and we can do the same thing for the negative sentiments. So all we'll do is we'll change this from positives to negatives, and in the JSON data we have something called negative, which is that array of all the negative responses, which there may not be any, but we know that at least it gives us negative and then an empty array to look through. The full attributed string we don't need because we declare it once at the top. We're going to be appending to that same string. We're going to look through all of the negative sentiments, and for each negative sentiment in all of the negatives in that array of negatives, we're going to grab a string, which is the comment body, and then we're going to get the negative response as an NS dictionary, the same as we did before. Because when it comes into this for loop, it's going to be an any object, and we need it to be an NS dictionary so we can grab values out of it. So we can say not positive sentiment, but negative sentiment, which is what we're currently looping through. The selected range is going to be the same exact thing, except instead of the positive text, we're looking through this individual negative text. So we have the selected range, and the only thing that we have to change is the UI color, and we have to change that to a red color. So now that we have the positive sentiments and the negative sentiments, we can actually run this. But before we do, we just have to mark one more thing here. We just have to say that now the comment body, which is that text, that the actual UI interface, the text that we're going to scroll through, we can set something called the attributed text, which will allow us to give us that colored text sort of thing. And we could say that the full attributed string. Now we're assigning all of that funky coloring and all that stuff we did, and we're actually assigning it to the user interface, and it'll appear on the screen. So now we can actually run this. So now when we run this, we actually get the proper behavior here. And if we click on a different one, you'll see that information once. So we get the positive and we get the negative when it's negative, and we get it all mixed in, and so that works perfectly. Thank you so much for watching. Obviously, we are merely scratching the surface with what is available from Idle On Demand. If you go to idleondemand.com/developer/APIs, you'll see a ton of stuff that you can use, including OCR recognition, text extraction, and a bunch of other stuff. And you should really go check it all out. We are only scratching the surface of what is available. With HP Idle On Demand, you can take some stuff that would be really, really advanced, take you a very long time to program, make you import tons of libraries, and actually just turn them into one single API call, which makes it so much simpler. I'm super impressed with this stuff, and I am definitely going to be doing more tutorials. And if you have any great ideas, definitely leave them in the comments below or on my GitHub tutorial request. And there's more tutorials for HP Idle On Demand available at community.idleondemand.com. Thanks a lot.